In just 3 fateful minutes, beneath the blinding police lights on the wet streets of Atlanta, a resilient black woman was handcuffed, falsely accused, and shoved into a brutal nightmare of injustice. The pain, fury, and burning determination drove her to turn the entire corrupt system upside down. But what's even more terrifying lies hidden in the shadows, a secret she never revealed from the start. Are you brave enough to uncover the truth that will leave the world in shock? Olivia Harper stepped out of the restaurant as if she had just left a successful press conference. Her dark gray business dress hugged her figure, and her silver watch gleamed under the streetlights. Her neatly curled hair was tied low, and the click of her nude heels echoed evenly on the wet sidewalk after the rain. Olivia embodied success, a 37-year-old black woman, communications director for a tech company in Atlanta, always carrying herself with grace and poise. She had just celebrated her best friend Maya's birthday, her laughter and bright smile filling the night. The cozy party ended with a hug and a message. Take care, Liv. On her way home, the atmosphere was unusually pleasant. The soft breeze carried the scent of wet grass, and the yellow streetlights stretched long across the water-streaked asphalt, reflecting in 1,000 sparkling dots. Olivia walked slowly, inhaling deeply and smiling, a rare moment when she allowed herself to slow down. This was one of the few times she felt her life had finally fallen into place. No more struggling with tuition fees, no more condescending stares in boardrooms full of white men. She had made it all on her own. But that peace shattered in an instant. The shrill wail of a siren tore through the night, piercing her chest. Olivia froze, her eyes wide. The red and blue lights of the police car spun and then shone directly on her, strong, sharp, cold, and without explanation. In that moment, it felt like the world was viewing her through a distorted lens, as though she had suddenly become a threat, a suspect for no reason other than the fact that she existed. The light, which should have been just a tool of authority, felt like a razor-sharp knife cutting deeply into the self-respect Olivia had spent decades building. It resurrected old memories. The time security guards followed her around in stores, the time she was denied a taxi, the pointed questions like, "Do you work here?" She had thought she was past all of that. But in just one flash of light, one sound of a siren, she was pulled back into the position society had always wanted to confine her to. A black woman who had to prove her innocence even when no accusations had been made. In that moment, Olivia Harper, the director, the friend, the lover, the daughter, was no longer any of those things. She was just a shadow standing still in the middle of the street, illuminated not to be seen, but to be doubted. The sound of the car door slamming shut was a chilling warning, a moment that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Olivia Harper's heart skipped a beat as the tall, imposing figure stepped out of the police car. His polished black boots made a sharp, purposeful echo against the wet pavement. His uniform was pristine, a reflection of his authority, his belt heavy with equipment that seemed to carry the weight of judgment. But it was his eyes, cold, detached, and devoid of curiosity, that sent a shiver down her spine. They held no interest in her story, no attempt to understand. It was as if he had already written her off, assuming she was the kind of person that needed to be watched. The officer moved toward her with measured, deliberate steps, his heavy boots pounding the wet streets as though each one was meant to make her feel the weight of his presence. The flashing red and blue lights of the police car danced across her face, turning her features into a distorted silhouette. The harsh beams cut through the night like a blade, and in that moment, Olivia felt like the entire world was judging her through a twisted lens, as if her existence alone was a crime. "Stop." The voice was deep, unwavering, filled with authority that left no room for questioning. "We've received a report of someone causing trouble around this area. You fit the description." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. A wave of disbelief and anger surged within her. She stood tall, trying to steady herself, her chest tight with the intensity of the moment. "I just left a restaurant less than 10 minutes ago," she said, her voice surprisingly calm despite the fire burning inside her. "I have the receipt, and people who can confirm I was there all evening. I'm not causing any trouble." Her hand reached for her purse, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out her driver's license. She held it up, her eyes locking with his, defiant. But the officer, whose name tag read Daniel Carter, barely spared a glance at the ID. His eyes, cold and indifferent, skimmed over her form like a predator sizing up its prey. He didn't care about the facts, didn't care about the truth. His eyes swept from her shoes to her carefully styled hair, and his lips curled slightly as he muttered through gritted teeth, as if he had repeated these words countless times. Everyone has an excuse. But anyone can make up a story. Without waiting for any kind of confirmation, without asking for more details, without even acknowledging her plea, Daniel Carter ripped off his gloves and approached her, his movements swift and decisive. "I'm going to search your purse," he said, his voice low and final, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Olivia's heart raced. She stepped back instinctively, her hands shaking as she spoke, the words tumbling out of her mouth. "I don't consent. You don't have a search warrant." She could feel her pulse in her throat, the blood rushing to her face in a mixture of anger and disbelief. She had rights, didn't she? She wasn't some criminal to be treated like this. But the officer didn't listen. His cold, detached demeanor never wavered. In one smooth motion, he began rifling through her purse, tossing aside receipts and makeup as though her personal belongings were nothing more than obstacles. He flipped open the compartments with a speed that bordered on aggression, running his hands through her things without so much as a second thought. Lipstick, gum, her wallet, everything was touched, poked, prodded with a chilling sense of entitlement. It was as though the boundary between her privacy and his suspicion had already been obliterated. Her hands clenched into fists, her knuckles turning white as she tried to steady herself. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of humiliation and fury bubbling inside her. This wasn't just about a purse. This was about everything she had worked for, every battle she had fought to rise above, the years of proving herself in a world that never gave her a fair chance. The nights spent studying, the days spent fighting against the weight of prejudice and doubt. All of it, in that moment, felt meaningless. She wasn't being treated like a human being, but like a suspect, a threat, a problem that needed to be controlled. When nothing was found in her purse, Daniel Carter's face didn't soften. It didn't change. It remained impassive, emotionless, as if he had already decided what she was. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice devoid of any empathy as he pulled out his handcuffs. "You'll be taken in for questioning." "No." Olivia's voice broke through the haze of anger and confusion. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not under arrest." She stepped back, her hands instinctively reaching for her phone. But before she could react, Daniel grabbed her arm. The cold, unforgiving metal of the handcuffs clicked shut with an awful finality, the sound of the cuffs snapping around her wrists like a death sentence. Her stomach churned, her legs suddenly feeling weak beneath her. For a moment, Olivia Harper, the accomplished, confident director, the woman who had built herself up against all odds, was reduced to nothing. Nothing but a woman standing on a cold street corner, handcuffed, her dignity stripped away with every passing second. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, the years of struggle, of overcoming every barrier, all seeming to crumble in an instant. It wasn't about the facts anymore. It wasn't about the truth. It was about what she represented in the eyes of the world, a black woman who needed to prove her innocence even when no one had accused her of anything. Each step she was forced to take felt like a knife cutting into her soul. It wasn't just the physical pain of the cuffs digging into her skin. It was the humiliation, the realization that she was being treated like a criminal, a suspect, when all she had done was walk home after a night out with friends. But this wasn't just about a police officer and a set of handcuffs. This was about a system that had never seen her as more than a statistic, a stereotype. It was about the fact that in this moment, her entire existence was being judged based on the color of her skin. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even shout at him for what he was doing to her. She simply stood there, handcuffed in the middle of the street, her eyes burning with a quiet rage. Her silence spoke louder than any words ever could. But in the deepest, most private part of her mind, Olivia screamed. She screamed for the injustice of it all, for the betrayal of everything she had fought to achieve, for the simple question that would forever haunt her. How could an innocent woman be humiliated just because of the color of her skin? The patrol car's door slammed shut behind Olivia, echoing with a dry, hollow sound that reverberated through the silence. She sat hunched in the back seat, her hands cuffed coldly tight, the metal digging into her wrists, causing the blood to rush painfully into her stiff fingers. The cramped space smelled of old rubber mixed with sweat and rust, the lingering scent of past arrests. Olivia stared out the window, her gaze fixed on the blurry rows of trees outside, but inside her mind, a storm was brewing. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't try to explain. She could have. She could have pulled out her FBI badge, shattered the officer's arrogant stare with one simple word, FBI. But she didn't. Olivia Harper, the woman shackled in the back of this car, wasn't a powerless victim. She was a trained federal agent, skilled in maintaining composure under pressure, able to read the smallest shifts in body language, attuned to the smallest movement in a system that now had turned its back on her. And she was taking mental notes of everything. Every word Daniel Carter had said, every step he took leading her off the sidewalk, every glance he avoided. She absorbed it all, like a file being meticulously filled out. But this time, unlike all the missions she had carried out before, she was the one being scrutinized. And that thought made Olivia fall into silence, not out of fear, but because she was waiting for the right moment, waiting for the truth to come out, not with anger, but with evidence and defiance. She remembered the grueling hours of training at Quantico, where she learned that the weak are those who react too quickly. The strong, however, are those who wait for the defining moment. She thought back to the cases she had solved, the criminals she had faced, the systems she had exposed for the charades they were. And now, bitterly, she found herself trapped within that same machine, being treated as a statistic, a suspect, simply because of the color of her skin. A fire burned quietly in her chest, not the kind of explosive rage that might have broken her, but a quiet, unyielding will, a spark that would ignite in the silence. She didn't know where this would lead, but she swore if she made it through, she wouldn't let this be forgotten. She would make them remember that they had made a grave mistake and that some pains are not meant to be endured but to spark change. The patrol car turned right, veering into the darkness of the police station like a heavy iron door closing behind her. But in Olivia Harper's eyes, at that moment, there was something brighter than the headlights. It was the gaze of a woman who had been pushed to the very edge of her dignity and was now preparing to strike back. The patrol car turned down a dark street, coming to a halt in front of the Midtown police station. Olivia sat motionless in the back, her wrists tightly cuffed on her lap, her eyes dry but not cold. In that gaze was a quiet, simmering determination, the determination not to let this end in silence. She remained silent, no begging, no questions, because she knew that now every action, every glance, and even her silence would become evidence. But as she was led down the stark white hallway, the harsh lights shining directly into her face, the people who loved her outside began to crumble. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone vibrated incessantly on the desk in his hotel room in Seattle. He saw Maya's name flashing with 3 missed calls. As soon as he opened the phone, a brief message appeared. Ethan, Olivia has been arrested. A second later, his heart tightened, and everything around him became meaningless. He called her back immediately. On the other end, Maya's voice trembled. I'm at the Midtown station. I don't know what happened. Olivia's been handcuffed, taken away. They won't let me see her. Ethan couldn't say anything. He just felt his blood freeze. In his mind, he saw Olivia, dressed in her professional gray suit, being dragged through the streets like a criminal. The overwhelming sense of helplessness surged like a wave, choking him, leaving him breathless. Across the city, Maya stood silently under a street lamp, clutching her phone, hearing the long, hopeless beeps echo in the still night. She stared at the police station gates where Olivia, her best friend for nearly 2 decades, was being held inside. She couldn't stop imagining Olivia alone in the cold room, being interrogated, doubted, and humiliated. She had seen Olivia speak with authority before, debate with the city council, coordinate media for major events. But now, Olivia was forced to remain silent and endure. Ethan placed a hand on his forehead, staring blankly at the unfamiliar hotel wall. He knew Olivia was not one to be easily broken, but it was precisely that strength that made his pain even worse. Because if even Olivia, The woman who always kept her composure and reason could not escape being dragged down because of the color of her skin. Then who could stand strong? The feeling of helplessness, of not being able to call anyone, not being able to rush to her side, drove him mad. Meanwhile, Maya trembled with anger. She wanted to shout at the officer who had just walked out. She's innocent. She's someone worthy of respect. But every word was choked in her throat as their indifferent gaze passed over her, as if she didn't even exist. In that moment, both Ethan and Maya felt the same pain. The pain of watching their dearest loved one being trampled on, broken, and not being able to do anything to stop it. They weren't handcuffed, but they too were imprisoned in an invisible jail, a prison of helplessness, of anger, and the fear that justice would never be for people like them. And that moment etched itself deeply in their hearts, a wound that would never heal, not because Olivia had been arrested, but because they hadn't been able to protect her when she needed them the most. Inside the Midtown Police Station's interrogation room, Olivia was led down a long, gray-carpeted hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a tired, almost resigned hum. She remained silent, each step controlled, her gaze steady, unwavering. No one knew that in her mind, she was already piecing together every detail, not to justify herself, but to remember. Like an investigator, she understood. From here on out, nothing would be simple procedure. She had felt that from the moment the cold cuffs had tightened around her wrists. The interrogation room opened, not too dark, not too bright, but cold. A metal table sat in the center, 2 chairs opposite each other, and a two-way mirror covering one entire wall. Olivia was uncuffed, but no one offered further explanation. They simply told her to wait. She sat down, rubbing her bruised wrists, taking a slow breath. But her eyes never left the mirror. She knew someone was watching her from behind it. They thought she was prey. What they didn't realize was that they had just awakened the survival instinct of a lioness. About 10 minutes later, the door swung open. Daniel Carter stepped in, a file in his hand, moving deliberately slow, as though trying to drag out every second. His eyes were no longer tight with the earlier tension. Now they wore an air of confidence, tinged with contempt. "This isn't going to be simple, Miss Harper," he started, his voice patronizing, as if speaking to a child caught in a lie. "You resisted arrest. You raised your voice, showed signs of disrespect, and even attempted to flee." Olivia narrowed her eyes. "What did I do?" she asked, her voice calm, but each word cutting like a knife. Daniel smiled faintly, a smile that held no warmth. "I'll be recording everything. We're also viewing the dashcam footage. If necessary, you'll be detained longer." Olivia blinked slowly, leaning back in her chair. A flash of confusion flickered across her face, not because of the false accusations, but because she realized the real game had begun, and it was dirtier than she had ever imagined. "Dashcam footage?" she asked, keeping her voice even. "Good. I look forward to seeing it." Daniel shrugged, as though he had been expecting this question. "Unfortunately, it seems the camera on the vehicle malfunctioned tonight. We've sent it to the technical department to see if it can be recovered. But honestly, I'm not holding out much hope." Olivia stared at the officer for a few seconds, then slowly turned toward the two-way mirror. She didn't need anyone to say more. The game was already clear. The narrative had been scripted. The only evidence that could help her was a technical glitch. And now, the entire truth lay in the hands of a man constructing lies without a flicker of hesitation. In that moment, Olivia felt a coldness rising from within, not from the room itself, but from the realization that the system she had once trusted operated like a puppet show. The liar held the strings, and the truth was dragged beneath their feet. A police officer, given power, could rewrite any event with nothing more than a report. And if no one stood up to question it, his words would become the stamped truth. Olivia gritted her teeth. This was no longer a personal matter. This was how thousands of innocent people were swallowed, not because they were guilty, but because they didn't have a louder voice than the lies of a dishonest officer. She looked at Daniel, not hiding the contempt in her gaze. "If I truly insulted and tried to flee, surely someone on the street would have seen it, right?" Daniel didn't respond, only smiled thinly and stood up, tapping lightly on the table with 2 fingers, as if to say, "Keep sitting there and thinking it over." The door closed behind him. Olivia sat alone, the light above her casting a harsh glow. as if questioning her very existence. But this time, Olivia didn't crumble. She looked into the mirror and silently vowed, "If you want to wage war with lies, then I'll make you pay with the truth." The interrogation room was soundproof, but Olivia could hear her heartbeat pounding in her chest as the door closed again. The atmosphere was thick. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent light above, casting a pale, white glow that made everything in the room feel hospital-like, cold and indifferent. Olivia sat upright, her hands clasped together on the cold metal table. She didn't shake, but something inside her chest felt constricted, not out of fear, but from the anger buried deep in her heart. The door opened. This time it wasn't Daniel, but a middle-aged inspector, salt and pepper hair, a weary face, but alert nonetheless. He didn't smile, didn't look at Olivia too long, just placed the file on the table and sat down. "Olivia Harper," he said, his voice flat, as if reading a list. "Do you know why you're here?" Olivia tilted her head, her eyes direct, cold. "I was unlawfully arrested by a lying officer." The man didn't react. He just opened the file, flipped through a few pages, then asked, "How did you react when you were asked to stop?" Olivia didn't pause. "I stopped. I asked why. I kept my hands away from my body. I didn't resist. I didn't yell. I didn't run." The interrogator fell silent, then put his pen down. "Can you prove that?" Olivia pursed her lips, her eyes shifting to the two-way mirror on the other side. "The dash cam footage will prove it." A brief silence followed. Then the response came like a knife slicing through the tension. "The police car's camera malfunctioned. There's no data." Olivia tilted her head, still looking at the inspector, but this time deeper, as though she was trying to peer through the gray mask of his face and see into his very soul. How strange. The camera's broken, one-sided testimony, and a black woman being falsely accused. She spoke slowly, her voice calm, but each word made the air thick. The man furrowed his brow, but didn't rebut. The questions kept coming, each one circling back to the same point. What had she said? What had she done? Was there any suspicious behavior? Olivia answered clearly, each word chosen carefully, like a bullet hitting its mark. But with every repetition, her heart ached because the injustice echoed again and again, like a scripted game. She knew that what was happening wasn't about finding the truth. It was about forcing her into a narrative that had already been written. That narrative didn't need logic. It just needed no one strong enough to challenge it. But they had chosen the wrong person. Olivia Harper wasn't a name easily swallowed. Behind the calm tone of her voice, behind her composed exterior, there was a storm gathering. As the inspector continued asking questions, Olivia wasn't just answering. She was analyzing. She took note of the way they structured the questions, the tone, the frequency with which they repeated words like attempt to flee, resisting, uncooperative. She knew exactly what was happening. They weren't searching for the truth. They were building a case to present to the public. She looked the inspector in the eye and spoke with a firm voice. "I will not sign anything. And I suggest you make sure that everything you write today can withstand scrutiny." The man looked up, a flicker of caution in his eyes. Olivia knew she had planted a seed, not of doubt, but of fear. Because now they knew she wasn't someone who could be easily broken. They could control the room, control the light, control the questions, but they couldn't control her will. And right there, under the harsh fluorescent lights, in the empty room with the cold glass walls, Olivia Harper, the woman smeared, the woman detained because of lies, silently began to form a plan. A plan not just to save herself, but to drag the entire system out of the darkness. She knew the journey ahead would be brutal, but she wouldn't back down. Because she understood, if she didn't do something, who would? After nearly 17 hours of being detained, interrogated, and pushed with leading questions, Olivia was released in silence. No apology, no explanation. Maya was waiting for her at the police station's door, her face pale, but still forcing a faint smile. They embraced in a brief moment. And just like that, Olivia felt her eyes burn, but she didn't cry. She was exhausted, yet there was still a smoldering fire inside her, one that had never quite gone out. She walked out of the station with her shoulders straight, her head held high, as if challenging the very sky hanging over her head. At home, Olivia took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the invisible dust of the mental torment she had endured in that fluorescent-lit room. But when she stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her hair, something made her pause. Through the window, the headlights from a car were shining directly into her living room. The car was parked not far from her apartment, its engine idling steadily, as though waiting for someone. She walked to the window's edge, pulled the curtains slightly open, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a police car, the license plate familiar. The silhouette behind the wheel remained still, but she knew that gaze, that unmistakable gaze. Daniel Carter. Not in uniform, not stepping out of the car, but his presence, in the middle of the quiet night, 3 houses down from hers, was unmistakable. No words, no actions, just his presence, just the headlights shining into her house. It was enough to send a clear message. I'm still here. I know where you are, and I can come back anytime. Olivia let the curtain fall, her palm cold to the touch. In that moment, every emotion she had held onto throughout the day shattered like glass. She had thought that once she walked out of the interrogation room, she could breathe. But now she understood that her journey to freedom hadn't begun with the door to the police station. It had begun with an unexpected fight. He was watching her, not openly, not with paperwork, but with purpose. The next morning, when Olivia left her apartment to meet with her lawyer, the car was gone. But 2 days later, it appeared again, this time parked across the street near the corner convenience store. Daniel didn't get out of the car, but his gaze, cold, unwavering, and shameless, met hers through the windshield, as if trying to suffocate her breath. Olivia turned away, but her chest tightened with a deeper ache than any physical pain. Fear. Not fear because she was weak, but because she knew that if he had started stalking her in the shadows, then the rules had become irrelevant to him. That feeling, the feeling of being a living target to someone with power, a weapon, and no fear, crept into every one of Olivia's daily actions. She jumped when she heard the sound of a car braking sharply down the street. She double-checked the locks on the door twice every night. She peered out the window just to make sure he wasn't there. And she knew he didn't need to make a move. His presence alone, like a ghost wearing the mask of authority, was enough to shatter her final sense of security. But in the midst of that fear, Olivia also felt something else. He was worried. Because if Daniel Carter had to follow her so closely, it meant he feared her silence. He feared that she wouldn't let it go. And just as he feared, Olivia had no intention of backing down. She was just waiting for the right moment to strike back. The afternoon sun in Atlanta was gentle, but Olivia no longer felt the peace it usually brought. She sat alone in her living room, the light filtering through the curtains, casting pale, grayish streaks on the hardwood floor. The silence was so thick that she could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. On the table in front of her were the case files, pens, and her phone, set to silent. For the past 2 days, Olivia had lived in a state of half-waking, half-dreaming, working during the day, restless at night with the anxiety that Daniel might appear outside her window. She knew she was being watched, and her instincts told her that his silence was just a cover for something far darker unfolding behind the scenes. At precisely 5:13 p.m., her phone rang, an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. On the other end was a young male voice, trembling with nervousness. "Miss Harper? This is Officer Liam Brooks. I shouldn't be calling, but I have to. I can't stay silent anymore." Olivia furrowed her brow and sat up straight. "Slow down. What's going on?" Liam took a deep breath. Then, as if the dam of his restraint had broken, he blurted out, "I was the one on duty monitoring the cameras that day. I saw the dash cam footage from Daniel's car. It clearly shows you did nothing wrong. You stopped, cooperated. There was no action like what was in his report." Olivia's heart raced. She slowly stood up, walking toward the window by habit, but then pulled the curtain shut, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That footage, it's gone." Liam's voice cracked. "No, it's gone. I saw Daniel walk into the surveillance room after my shift. When I came back, the footage had been deleted from the system. No one dared ask. The higher-ups said it was a technical issue, but I know it wasn't. They're covering for each other." In that moment, Olivia felt the air in the room grow thick. Her mind spun, not out of surprise, but because everything she had feared was true. He had deleted the footage, the only evidence that proved her innocence. He had used the power entrusted to him to cover up his wrongdoing. And worse, an entire system was staying silent, complicit in the lie. You need to know this. Liam's voice was barely a whisper, as if he feared being overheard. I can't go public. I'll lose my job. But if it comes to it, I'll testify. I can't sleep knowing I didn't tell you this. Olivia stood still, her eyes burning, not with fear, but with an anger that ran deep, cold, and unyielding. Not because she had been deceived, but because justice, the very thing she had believed in, served, and protected, was being twisted and trampled on by a corrupt man. He had tried to destroy her, and now he was trying to destroy the truth. She spoke slowly, each word heavy, cutting through the air like a vow. I won't let him get away with this. You did the right thing calling me, Liam. I can't promise I'll protect you, but I promise the truth will not die in silence. After the call ended, Olivia stood in the middle of her living room, her hands clenched into fists. All the doubts, all the pieces were now in place. He wasn't just lying. He was manipulating the entire system to silence justice. But he had made one crucial mistake. Olivia Harper was not someone easily erased from the game. After Liam Brooks's call, Olivia stood motionless in the middle of her living room, gripping her phone as if it were the last lifeline, keeping her from falling into the abyss. The apartment was deathly quiet, with only the hum of the air conditioner and her own heavy breathing filling the space. The late afternoon light slipped through the window frame, casting a faint halo on Olivia's face, revealing the silent tears that slid down her cheek. Not from weakness, but because the truth was too painful to swallow in silence. She had tried to stay calm, tried to go about things civilly, tried to remain silent and wait for the system to correct its wrongs. But now, there was no more doubt. The system wasn't wrong by accident. It had been twisted by people like Daniel Carter. And if she did nothing, how many more would be shoved into the abyss just like she had been? How many truths would be lost due to technical issues? How many victims would have no one like Liam to call them in the dark? Tears fell from Olivia's eyes, hot and full of rage, but her gaze burned with something sharper, like a blade cutting through the fog. In those tears, something inside her shifted. She was no longer Olivia Harper, the black woman wrongfully arrested because of her skin color. She was no longer Olivia Harper, the federal agent lying low to uphold the rules. She was Olivia Harper, a warrior. She walked briskly to her desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out her notebook, the one she had always used to jot down notes on special cases. Beside it lay a thin black envelope where she kept her FBI badge. She stared at it for a moment, but didn't open it. She wouldn't need it right now. What she needed first was a plan to expose Daniel Carter, a plan to restore the truth, a plan to force a rotten system to face itself. Olivia wrote down names, events, and key pieces of evidence. Daniel's false report, the deleted footage, his presence around her house, Liam Brooks, the questions no one dared ask. Then she circled one name, Linda Poe, the civil rights lawyer she had helped with a federal investigation years ago. Olivia had never asked anyone for personal help before, but this time, she knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. She wiped her tears away, then dialed the number. Her voice, when it finally came through, was soft but unwavering. Linda? It's me. I need you. Not just for me, but for all the people who've never been heard. There was a brief silence on the other end before Linda's voice came through, clear and decisive. I'm listening. Start talking. When Olivia hung up the phone, the night had settled outside the window. But inside the apartment, a fire had just been lit. And this time, it wasn't just for warmth. It would burn away the lies, burn away the cowardice, and light the way for justice to return to the light. The morning sky in Atlanta was overcast, as if the entire city were holding its breath, waiting for a storm. Olivia sat alone in a small cafe on the corner of Peachtree, her hands wrapped around a steaming cappuccino, her eyes gazing out the window, distant. The space around her was warm, but inside, she still carried the lingering effects of sleepless nights, the unspoken threats, and a truth that had yet to be revealed. She waited for the person she had called the night before, the only woman she trusted to stand by her in this fight. The door of the cafe opened, and Karen Wells stepped in, tall, decisive, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, her eyes sharp as a blade, her stride commanding. Olivia stood up. The two black women looked at each other for a few seconds without speaking, then embraced tightly. Not a polite greeting, but an embrace between two souls who had weathered the same storm, though at different times. They sat down, and Karen spoke first, her tone firm but not harsh. "I've read everything you sent. I also checked Daniel Carter's record. That name isn't unfamiliar to me." Olivia nodded slightly. "I know I'm not the first." Karen looked her in the eye. "But you might be the last, if we do this right." The words weren't meant as comfort. They were a promise, a commitment. Karen continued, her voice softer now, almost in a whisper. "I was like you once. 28 years old, pulled out of my car for driving too slowly in a white neighborhood. They made me sit on the sidewalk for 2 hours, questioning me like I was a criminal. I was a lawyer back then, but that didn't mean anything." Olivia swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Karen placed her hand on the table, close to Olivia's. "They think education, titles, or talent can protect us from prejudice. But the truth is, the color of our skin is the first crime we can never wash away." In that moment, Olivia no longer felt alone. Before her was a woman who had experienced the same quiet, lingering pain, the humiliation of being seen as disposable just because of the color of her skin. They didn't need to say everything. Just the way their gazes met was enough. The wound would never fully heal, but it could turn into armor. Karen opened the file. "I will represent you. I will contact the internal investigators. I want to recover the footage that was deleted or prove that it was deleted intentionally. I also want to meet with Liam Brooks." Olivia nodded. "I've spoken with him. He's scared, but he's willing." They sat in silence for a few moments. Outside, the wind began to pick up. Olivia looked at Karen, her eyes now brighter, more resolute, but still carrying some of the pain. "I never thought I'd have to use my actual position to protect myself." Karen tilted her head. "What's holding you back?" Olivia answered softly, almost a whisper. "Because I was trained to stay silent, to not flaunt power, to not abuse my title. But this time, if I don't speak out, the truth will be killed." Karen looked at her, then smiled, a rare smile, not sarcastic, not defensive. "Then let the truth speak louder than any title. It's time for the system to know we're not bowing our heads anymore." As they stood up and left the cafe, stepping out into the street, a gust of wind blew across the sidewalk. Their hair fluttered in the breeze. But this time, Olivia didn't pull her collar up to hide her face like she had before. She walked straight ahead, shoulders square, stepping beside an ally. No longer a victim, she was someone about to turn the game around, a game that had been manipulated with lies. The car stopped in the parking lot behind the law office in downtown Atlanta. On the drive back from their meeting at the cafe, the two women remained silent, not because they ran out of things to say, but because they both carried unspoken words within them. Olivia looked through the windshield. The faint sunlight cast its glow on the Wells and Associates sign, where lawsuits against injustice had often begun and sometimes ended in silence. But today, Olivia knew the silence would no longer last. Entering the small conference room on the second floor, Karen opened her laptop, placed the file on the table, and prepared to begin strategizing. But Olivia remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression deep in thought. Karen looked up, frowning slightly. "Is something wrong?" Olivia slowly walked over, pulled out the chair across from Karen, but didn't speak right away. She looked directly into Karen's eyes, and for the first time, hesitation flickered in her gaze. Not out of fear, but because she knew what she was about to say would change everything. "Karen, before we go any further, there's something I need to tell you." Olivia's voice was low, slow, and clear. "I'm not just a victim in this. I'm not just a woman who got stopped by the police in the middle of the night. I'm an FBI agent. I work in strategic analysis and special crime monitoring. I've been undercover for over 6 years." Karen froze. She blinked a few times, as if processing everything she had just heard. Her hands, which had been holding a pen, hovered in the air for a few seconds. The room felt frozen. "Your FBI?" Karen asked again, unable to mask her astonishment. Olivia nodded. No beating around the bush, no diminishing the truth. "I've kept that secret for many years, even from my family and loved ones. But now, I can't stay silent anymore. Not when the truth is being twisted this badly. Not when I, a federal agent, am being treated like a criminal just because of my skin color." Karen leaned back in her chair, her gaze still fixed on Olivia. But this time, the shock wasn't just surprise. There was a glimmer in her eyes, the kind of light warriors share when they realize they've just been given the strength to fight. God, Karen whispered softly. An FBI agent arrested just for walking in the middle of the night? Interrogated, lied to, threatened? Do you know your story? It'll be a bombshell if it's revealed the right way. Olivia didn't smile. Her voice dropped. I don't want to attract attention because of my title. But if my identity can force the system to look at itself, I'm ready to expose everything. Karen stood up, pacing around the room, gripping the file tightly. We'll use this, not to create shock, but to raise a question no one can avoid. If even a black FBI agent can be wrongfully arrested, threatened, and stripped of basic civil rights, how rotten is this system? Olivia nodded. Now that the truth had been spoken, she felt a weight lift off her chest. But that weight wasn't replaced by peace. It was a shift. From here on, every step she took could ignite a larger confrontation. Karen looked at Olivia, her eyes now blazing with resolve. We won't just protect you, Olivia. We'll use this case to uncover the way the system has always twisted the truth, turning innocent people into scapegoats. You're the key, and now we'll start turning that door. The two women stood up, facing each other. They were no longer a lawyer and a client. They were two women, each scarred by the same invisible force, prejudice. And now, they were preparing to turn that pain into a spear, driving straight into the heart of the system that had forced them to bow their heads for far too long. Courtroom 3 at the Fulton County Courthouse was packed that day from early morning. Rumors had been swirling in the media about a sensitive case involving misconduct allegations against a senior police officer. But none of them, not even those sitting at the prosecutor's table, could have predicted the shock wave that was about to ripple through the room in the coming minutes. Olivia Harper, dressed in a sharp black suit, entered the courtroom like a cold breeze in the summer heat. Her gaze calm, her posture straight, each step an unspoken declaration, I will not bow my head. Daniel Carter sat at the prosecutor's table, his grip tightening around his plastic coffee cup, his eyes darting around like an animal cornered. He had assumed this hearing would be a mere formality, that everything would slip under the radar, just like so many other cases. But when Karen Wells stood up and walked to the center of the room, her gaze silenced the entire courtroom. There were no extra words, no introductions, just a clear, decisive voice. Your Honor, before we rebut the charges against my client, Miss Olivia Harper, there is a truth that justice needs to hear. My client is a federal agent working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, in the Special Crimes and Strategic Analysis Unit. The air in the room froze. Whispers of disbelief rippled through the rows of seats behind. Journalists leapt to their feet, cameras snapping relentlessly like fireworks. The court clerk blinked, her hand halting midair over the keyboard. And Daniel Carter, was so stunned he dropped the lid of his coffee cup, his face turned ashen, his mouth slightly agape. Olivia stood tall beside her lawyer, her gaze not turning toward Daniel, but directly toward the judge. The white lights reflected off her dark skin, making her presence even more imposing, as though she had become a living monument. She didn't need to say a word, just her presence here, in the courtroom, in the very system that had tried to crush her, was a silent declaration of war. Karen continued, her voice steady but cutting. A woman trained to investigate national crimes, stopped for no reason, falsely accused, with evidence of her innocence deleted. If even a federal agent cannot be protected from the abuse of power by the system, how can any ordinary citizen out there defend themselves? Only then did Olivia take a step forward, her voice ringing out, not trembling, not angry, but filled with a weight that stilled the room. I'm not standing here for myself. I stand for all those who have been shackled in silence, those without a title to challenge false reports, those who were deemed guilty because their skin was just a little darker. The judge looked at Olivia, then glanced over at Daniel, who was now avoiding the gaze of everyone in the room. On the prosecutor's table, the heavy case files seemed to lose their weight, and in the minds of everyone present that day, only one question echoed. If this is how the system treats a federal agent, who is justice really serving? The hearing had just begun, but Olivia knew the storm had already risen. And this time, she wasn't just seeking the truth for herself. She was carving a path for all those who had been buried beneath silence. The air in the courtroom thickened when the name Liam Brooks was called. Some looked around, perhaps not expecting the next witness to be a young, thin officer, his face pale and hands dotted with sweat. Liam walked to the witness stand as though each step weighed twice as much as his body. But behind his nervousness was a flicker of determination, a light growing brighter. When the oath was sworn, Karen stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "Officer Brooks, please tell the court what you saw the night Olivia Harper was arrested." Liam swallowed hard, his eyes briefly casting down to the floor before they landed on Olivia, who was watching him with eyes free of judgment, offering silent support. "I was the one on duty in the surveillance room that night," Liam began, his voice shaky. "I watched the dashcam footage from Officer Carter's car. It clearly shows Ms. Harper did nothing wrong. She stopped, cooperated, didn't resist, didn't try to flee. She stood still, raised her hands, and asked why. Everything Officer Carter wrote in his report is a lie." The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Liam glanced over at Daniel, then continued. "The next morning, I came back, and the video file was deleted from the system. I had no way to restore it. No one asked me. And when I tried to speak up, I was warned that this was an internal matter and that I should be careful." A quiet wave of outrage spread through the courtroom. Karen took another step forward. "Why did you decide to come forward today?" Liam bit his lip, his voice choked with emotion as he answered. "Because I couldn't sleep knowing an innocent person was being smeared, and I stayed silent. I joined this line of work because I believed in justice, not to protect liars." His words, simple yet heartbreaking, made Olivia lower her head, her eyes red. A young man, not yet 30, forced to choose between his career and his conscience just to speak the truth. And it was that choice that made everyone hiding behind the system bow their heads. When Liam's testimony ended, the courtroom sank into a different kind of silence, not one of waiting, but of release. The judge lowered his head for a long moment, then lightly slammed the gavel on the desk. "After considering the witness's testimony and the inconsistencies in the records, I declare that all charges against Miss Olivia Harper are dismissed. The hearing is adjourned." The courtroom erupted in applause, but there was only one person who couldn't accept the truth: Daniel Carter. He leapt up from his seat, shouting loudly, "It's all a scam. She's manipulating everything. It's a federal conspiracy to ruin me." The security officer immediately stepped forward, restraining him as Daniel struggled, his eyes bloodshot, his voice shrieking. "You're a snake. You'll pay for this." The judge struck the gavel harder, his voice sharp. "Mr. Carter, one more word, and I will order your arrest for contempt of court." But Daniel didn't stop. He looked around as though trying to drag someone down into the abyss with him. But no one stood by his side. Not the prosecutor, not the police, not the audience, not his colleagues. In that moment, the man who had once thought himself the ultimate power in the shadows now stood revealed as nothing more than a broken puppet, exposed by the light of truth. As Olivia walked out of the courtroom, the afternoon breeze lifted her hair, and the sound of applause rang through the hallway. Journalists crowded around, cameras flashing nonstop. But she walked slowly, steadily, her head held high. Beside her was Karen, her eyes shining, not just with the satisfaction of a lawyer who had just won a case, but with pride in having fought alongside someone like Olivia Harper. The crowd parted, and all eyes were on her, not as a victim anymore, but as a symbol. Liam Brooks stood silently off to the side, nodding slightly when their eyes met. Olivia smiled faintly, knowing that it was thanks to his courage that the light had been allowed to shine in a room that had once been filled with darkness. On the courthouse steps, Olivia paused. In front of her was a sea of people waiting to hear her speak. But she didn't need a microphone. All she needed was her gaze, a gaze that had burned with unyielding fire since that night. That gaze said it all. "I've been trampled, but I'm still standing here. And I will keep fighting, not just for me, but for all those who've never been believed." And in that moment, Atlanta didn't just see a woman exonerated. They saw a flame being ignited, and it would never go out. News of the historic hearing quickly spread throughout Atlanta and beyond. But Olivia's victory didn't end in the courtroom. It was like a quiet earthquake, stirring hearts and opening the door for voices that had long been forgotten, those who had only dared to knock gently. As the internal investigation into Daniel Carter's misconduct officially began, emails, calls, and anonymous messages began flooding the Police Ethics Committee's office. And then, one by one, witnesses stepped out of the shadows. A single mother spoke of being dragged out of her car just for driving too slowly in a predominantly white neighborhood. A teenager recalled being wrongfully accused of stealing while shopping, despite having only books in his backpack. An elderly father cried in a press conference, recalling how he was beaten and had his ribs broken for refusing to cooperate while making a phone call outside a store. They had been silent for so long out of fear, loneliness, and the knowledge that no one would believe them against a powerful officer. Each story was a needle piercing the public conscience, the raw truth, unembellished, not shouted in anger, but still enough to make people wince. And the worst part? No one had ever spoken up. No department had ever investigated thoroughly. No charges had ever been brought to light. Daniel Carter had existed like a ghost in uniform, traveling across the city, spreading fear under the guise of law enforcement, until Olivia Harper forced him into the light, stripped bare by the truth. Weeks after the trial, Olivia did not choose rest. She turned down commercial interviews and stayed away from sensational TV programs. Instead, she visited universities, community centers, and places less noticed, but where thousands of young Black people struggled with the unanswered questions. Am I safe? Will I be believed if something bad happens to me? Who will stand up for me? On a small stage at a high school in the southern part of the city, Olivia stood before hundreds of students, her eyes meeting young faces, most of them brown and Black. And they were all listening. Her voice didn't need to be loud. It was soft but heavy as stone. I used to believe I was safe because I had an FBI badge in my wallet. I used to believe I was different, that if I complied, I'd never be a target. But one night, just for walking home in my business suit, I was stopped, handcuffed, smeared. And if I weren't an agent, if I didn't have evidence, a lawyer, witnesses, I could have been locked up or worse. She paused, the spotlight catching the tears in her eyes, but her voice didn't falter. I'm standing here not because I won. I'm standing here because the system failed. And if I don't speak, if we don't speak, then who will speak for us? The room fell silent. Then a round of applause erupted, not loud, but steady, like a pledge. Because they knew that voice wasn't just the voice of one woman. It was the voice of a generation waiting to be heard. On a Friday afternoon, as the golden sunlight of Atlanta streamed through the curtains, Olivia received an unexpected call from the regional FBI director's office. A warm but professional voice came through the line. Agent Harper, after reviewing the entire case and following the recommendation of the Human Resource Department, we would like to offer you the position of Senior Advisor in the Civil Rights Division. Olivia sat still in her apartment, gripping the phone tightly, not out of surprise, but because she knew this moment would come. She just hadn't expected it so soon. You have the full right to decline. We understand that personal matters can affect your work. But if you accept, we would like you to lead a task force to investigate similar cases across the country. Instances of abuse of power, racial discrimination, and deliberate cover-ups in law enforcement. Olivia didn't need to think long. She asked one question. Do I have full discretion in selecting the investigative team and where to begin? You do. Then I accept. When the call ended, Olivia stared at the old photo on her desk, one taken when she was a rookie at Quantico. Her face back then was innocent, full of ideals. Now, she was no longer innocent, but the ideals within her had never dimmed. They had been honed, turned into a weapon. She wasn't fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to protect those who had no choice. Olivia Harper was no longer just a survivor of injustice. She was now leading a new journey, where wounds were transformed into missions, where pain no longer stayed buried, but became an outstretched arm to those still struggling in the darkness. And this time, she was not fighting alone. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful and emotional journey. Olivia Harper's story is more than just one woman's fight. It's a mirror held up to a system that too often fails those it was meant to protect. From being falsely accused and humiliated to rising as a symbol of resilience and justice, Olivia reminds us that silence only serves the oppressor and that truth, when spoken with courage, can shatter even the most corrupt foundations. If her journey moved you, If it stirred something in your heart or reminded you of a time you or someone you know were made to feel powerless, then please don't let this be the end. Help us continue sharing stories that matter, stories that shine a light in dark places, that give voice to the unheard, and that fight back against injustice with truth and compassion. Subscribe to Emotional Journey. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Together, we don't just tell stories, we make sure they're never forgotten. Let's keep walking toward justice, one voice, one story, and one brave step at a time.